Hi, everybody. International publicist Tennant Nicholson here, and this is my pet project, how to be a precinct leader.org. It is actually like following my journey of learning to be a precinct leader. I am the precinct vice chair of East Flat Rock in Henderson County for the Democratic Party, and I don't know anything. So I've been a voter, a Democratic voter, since I was 18. I'm now 49, and I've been moved to action in our recent election process. I have to watch the news every day as a publicist, and so it actually soothes me to know that I'm actually taking action in my local community, whereas in the past I've only done international and national matters and campaigns and so forth. So I'm geared toward national and international. So the local stuff is new to me. And so I'm doing a series of interviews, educating myself. And I thought, hey, let's just put it on loudspeaker so we can all benefit from it. And at my beekeepers meeting, I met a guy who, we're both into beekeeping. And then he was like, I know you from the Democratic Party. And I was like, what? And all of a sudden we realized that, oh, we're both beekeepers and we're both politically minded. And I just think he's a wealth of information. So I wanted to interview him in front of you so that we can both benefit from his knowledge base. And without any further ado, Marc Paulus, welcome to my pet project.
Well, hey, Michelle, good to see you.
You too. So let's go ahead and tell people a little bit about your background, because when I got present to who you are, I was like, oh yeah, he knows a lot about politics. So tell us a little bit about your background first so we can get acquainted with that.
In a nutshell, I worked for 40 years in environmental and animal protection organizations. And I worked on a local, state, and federal level. For a number of years, I lived on Capitol Hill and lobbied the U.S. Congress. But I also served as regional director for 5 southern states, including North Carolina, and worked on legislative matters in state capitals, and quite often was called in to local communities to work on improving ordinances, dealing oftentimes with animal protection issues, dog and cat control issues, but sometimes on environmental matters as well. So each of these institutions, state, local, or federal, requires a somewhat different approach, but the whole idea is to gain access for your message and also to mobilize people on whatever level you're working so that they too can convey an effective message to legislators and influence the direction of policy. That's the whole point of lobbying, is to influence the direction of policy.
You know what? You know what I forgot to tell you about.
Okay.
Bees in particular, the way that they communicate as a superorganism, and there's application actually to what we're about to talk about. So what we're going to talk about, everybody, is what works and what doesn't work. And I own my own companies. I've got bees to take care of. I got chickens to take care of, and I live in a beautiful area, Western North Carolina, so I want to spend as much time as I can in Pisgah and DuPont Forest in my bike or in my kayak. So I am only interested in things that make a difference. And I am well aware and that work. And I'm well aware that every action that I take as a precinct leader may not be efficient. And so that's what I'm really exploring, is like, what is not only action to take, but what is efficient action to take? So we were talking about lists, and so I interviewed a guy named Eric Paulus, and he was like, look, all the research shows, you should do drop-off dems or new dems. This is what's going to make a huge difference. Focus on them, so that there's strategy behind. So talk to me about, as a precinct leader, so everybody, we're going to talk both at a local level for precinct leadership, but we're also going to talk about that national level, so that if you're a precinct leader of like for me, I'm in East Flat Rock, and I'm worried about just making sure that I help people vote that want to vote in my area, right? But then there's also that macro conversation that we're all worried about, is how to make a difference overall, especially with the concerns that we have every day when we watch the news. And that's what we're going to handle next. So the first thing is, Marc with a C, not a K, what should we be doing as precinct leaders first and foremost with our neighbors?
Okay. Well, first of all, you have to understand the math in a precinct. My own precinct here, which is the Etowah South area, has 500 or so registered Democrats. And an election here can be decided by 5 or 10 votes. So what's important for us to do is to inform people of an upcoming election, give them enough information so that they can make choices that best represent their concerns. But getting out the vote is so critical because so few people can actually make a difference in who may be elected. And that's for any number of positions. You may have a mayor's office or a mayor's race decided on the basis of the majority of 500 votes. So the one person who gets 260 votes out of 500 is now the mayor. Now that can exist in the community where there are 10,000 people who could have voted but didn't choose to vote. So our first priority always, and no matter which level of politics we're dealing with, is to get out the vote and to make sure that your message is motivating enough to get people to actually take that physical step of going and casting a vote.
To that end, I want to just share what happened yesterday when I was doing my virtual phone banking from right here. It's very easy to get out the vote, by the way. If you're looking at this video and you're curious about precinct leadership and whether you should do it in your county and state, the answer is yes, you should. And if you're not going to lead, then you should get on the team that's leading your precinct. So I'm just making phone calls, just identifying myself as the neighbor. Hey, I'm just here to support you with midterm elections. The woman was like, oh my God, thank you so much. I'm in Atlanta. I travel so much. I just give up because I'm traveling so much. And I said, well, what about voting by mail? Absentee ballot. She goes, great. I don't even know how to start that. I said, I'll send you. And we've got a team of people. So I asked Chris to send it. And then he sent a self-addressed stamped envelope with the absentee ballot. She fills it out, fills it in, and she's got a ballot. It's really that easy.
Yes, it is. It really is that easy. And a lot of people are unaware of that option. So that was an extremely effective conversation. You almost certainly secured a vote for several candidates who will support our agenda, the policies that we care about. There are other things that can be done, of course, on the precinct level. We're getting ready to have a meet the candidate ice cream social in a public park. The idea being is you don't have to invite people if you do it in a public park and people can just drop by because you've got the attraction of getting free ice cream or something. And then at that moment also meet the candidate, get a little bit of literature, and be hopefully motivated to go to the polls in the upcoming elections.
Yeah, and then, there's also the essence of time, and those of us who are still working, we might not be able to make all those socials. And so I'm a lover of digital communications. I think that it's a way to send viral. That's why these videos, and I just, before you, I actually interviewed a North Carolina Court of Appeals judge candidate. I have to tell one on myself. And this is why I think that, it's important. I'm an educated woman with a master's degree, and I have gone into the polls in the past with literally just the information I've gotten from the Democratic Party and then vote, right? Not really having met a particular candidate. And I have a moment of fear and terror when I get to a name I don't recognize. Right? So that's the biggest thing that we can do, is make a difference for people in our precincts. Just give them the information, give them, what's the candidate standing for, what's the information behind them, and so forth. But let's talk a little bit about at the top. So the other thing that I've been learning a lot about is dark money, lobbying. And, we were raised by Schoolhouse Rock, it's a bill. That's all it is, right? It's all cut and dry, but it's not cut and dried anymore.
No.
And I want everybody to know that I own corporations, S Corp, so I'm not an anti-corporation. And so, and I'm finding out that I'm actually more of a moderate than I thought I was. Maybe it's because I own companies, but tell us about the dark side of DC. It's scary, Marc. What's happening?
Well, everything changed after the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. That was a decision in which the Supreme Court decided, and I think quite inappropriately, but it had gone far it had been very much influenced by corporate interests at that point. But the Supreme Court decided that money is free speech, and that corporations donating money to a political campaign was allowable because that essentially was free speech. Up until that point, corporations could not donate money directly. And so it had to go through individuals with the corporation, and they had limitations on how much they could donate. And then we created, as you were talking about dark money, we created these obscure PACs, political action committees, and where people could contribute money, not all of which was accountable. So you didn't necessarily know who was behind this particular political action committee. Citizens for Progress sounds good, but it may not be created by or financed by progressive individuals. They may, in fact, be representing an interest that's absolutely opposite what you might think that it is. Right now, the big problem we've got on both the state and federal level in particular is that so much money is coming from outside of their base, their constituency, outside of their state, or even outside of their district, if they're on the state level. So much money is coming from outside, and it's influencing access and policy by that legislator because they no longer rely on local support for financing $1 million advertisement campaigns and such. So they look to the Koch brothers, or they look to these multi-billionaires, Sidney Adelson being one that owns casinos in Vegas, and they dump huge amounts of money locally into campaigns to influence what goes on in places like North Carolina. And how that comes to bear in a way that hurts individuals is in tax law. It comes to bear in right-to-work states, which basically are union-busting laws. So the interests of the people, or in removing environmental protections that might otherwise protect us from, pollutants being discharged into streams and rivers and stuff. So we see the influence of corporations and corporate interests overriding dramatically the interests of individual constituents. And that is a new thing. I remember when I first started lobbying in DC, I could go to see Senator Dole and have a direct conversation with a U.S. senator. And after Citizens United, well, Dole was gone, but he was one of the really good guys, very accessible. But getting personal access with a senator or a congressman has become more and more difficult. So then how do you get your message across? I mean, that was the challenge we had to learn when you don't have direct access, because the only people with direct access were major contributors dropping tons of money into a campaign. So how else can you get direct access? Well, you get direct access by going to town hall meetings and speaking directly to a candidate, or by going to the district office, the local office, regardless of whether the legislator is in Raleigh for like a state legislator or in DC. They do have local offices that are staffed by 2 or 3 people who are trying to keep a pulse on the local community. And those folks have to report up line, as it were, to the state or federal office on what the pulse is in the local community. So those people are much more accessible. You can go to a district office. On the federal level, every congressman or senator, they may have staff, more than 100 people on their staff, and it's not uncommon. But many people on their staff are assigned with a specific area of expertise, and it may be farm policy, or it may be environmental policy, or it may be housing, or whatever. What you need to do is cultivate the relationships with the issue people that support the candidate, that write the white papers, that make it, through the director, the staff director, and get on the candidate's desk or the legislator's desk. And so rather than blindly sending letters or emails or postcards, generally speaking, to a legislator that are intercepted by the mail staff, or they're intercepted by the people that sit there deleting 1,000 emails in batches every day. What you want to do is you want to bypass those folks, and you want to get to those individuals that are receptive, because they're charged with knowing about the issue, so they're receptive to your point of view. And if it's persuasive, and if it's in the public interest, and if they feel there's some accountability for their boss, they will then write the white paper and pass on the recommendation that takes into consideration your point of view. And that I found is much more effective, at least on the federal level, than even talking to the legislator themselves. I've cornered federal legislators sometimes on airplanes and stuff like that, and they have so much being thrown at them on a day-to-day basis that they really tell you, you got to talk to so-and-so on my staff. They'll immediately point you to somebody who is going to analyze and review the material and then make a proposal back to them.
It's just, God, it really it's so much like PR.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got to, as a publicist, you have to find the right producer or the right beat reporter who's covering that. Right. So you don't call in and talk to the publisher. You call in and you talk to the managing editor or the producer who's covering animals, for example. Right.
Or healthcare or whatever. Yeah.
Whatever it is. Right. And then you've got to and then they go to an editorial meeting and then present, here's what is trending, blah, blah, blah. And here's our sources that, you got to shape the story. I always call myself a storyteller to the media, because all we're doing is really shaping public stories. The same thing with politics. The other thing that, because we share bees in common, I was at that beekeepers conference, and the bees also do a waggle dance, and they also do this shaking technique, and they do all this communication physically with each other to say, you've got to pay attention. This is the best spot we need to move because we're swarming it just a bit, and you've got to actually move to this place. Or I just found the best place for pollen, and based on their enthusiasm, they're going to actually go or not. I can't help but think that these are related, right? And so as a precinct leader, what are the things that we could do that I haven't really thought about, but I've just naturally done it, is kind of take what is the beat of the community? What's really important to them, and really talk about, as a precinct leader, I'm listening a lot. What is important to you? I just want to make sure that I support you in your vote and get and I just know that, whether somebody's born here locally, whether they were born in the South, whether they've been transplanted, now they've moved from being, now they're retired, and it all depends on how they've been conditioned and who they are as people based on what their primary concerns are. And my people in East Flat Rock are not the same people in Bumpkin County in West Asheville.
Absolutely. And I'd like to throw in, to kind of follow up on your analogy about beehives. You've noticed, certainly I have as well, that different hives have different temperaments.
That's true. Yeah, for sure. Mine are mad right now.
Yeah. And I look at it as the hive mind. And what we see in politics is we have the hive mind. There's the Republican hive mind and the Democrat hive mind. And then that pretty much follow blindly what they're told. And they don't really, they don't delve deeply. They don't think through the issues for themselves. And they hopefully have good leadership that's leading them in the right direction. But it doesn't always work that way. Yeah,
that's mostly I am that for so many years. Go ahead.
Yeah. So that's how, fake news comes in, and people just buy into these whopper, crazy, ridiculous stories that they should know better, if they were thinking of themselves, but they don't. We tend to go along too often with the opinions of others, because we think that if others hold that opinion, they must have thought it through. Well, they haven't always thought it through, and it's not always being presented accurately. So yeah, to be responsible as a precinct leader or as a lobbyist, you need to know both sides of an issue, and you need to very accurately present both sides of an issue so that you have credibility. One of the things I learned, lobbying, especially in Florida years ago, was there's the mobile home industry that was fighting against tough standards for hurricane proofing their mobile homes. That wasn't in the best interest, but there was no other side ever being represented. So they got their way for years and years and years on very weak standards, structural standards, until somebody finally came through and said, whoa, hold on a minute. There's another side to this issue. And these, it's costing taxpayers, it's costing insurance companies, it's costing individuals their lives. And yes, we need to have stronger regulations. That's what I think we're trying to do as lobbyists or as political people, is we're trying to analyze an issue in a way that best represents the public interest. And sometimes that means we have to look at ourselves internally within our precinct or within our party and say, oh, wait a second, we're off base. Let me give you a recent example. I mean, just from this past week, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party was able to pass, I guess it was a resolution, banning taking fossil fuel money for campaign contributions. This was the Democrats saying, okay, global warming is an issue for us, and we're not going to take money from oil companies and stuff in great detail. Well, unfortunately, that only lasted like 3 days. And then the old guard of the party came in and said, well, we really can't afford to do without that money. So let's adopt a position that we're in favor of wise use of natural resources. And they weakened it, and now the Democratic Party is going to take what, in my opinion, dark money, money that is anathema to what we want to do. So that's an example of an internal fight, or an internal dispute, I should say. And where's it going to end up? Well, again, building on something you said earlier about you've got a tremendous facility with modern media. And one of the problems that we're seeing in the party right now is the division between the technologically astute and the non-technologically astute.
Oh, yeah, you don't have to tell me.
Yeah, and so, the tools that really got Barack Obama elected was the amazing ability he had to mobilize these young and very technologically aware people. And that's where I think our future is. And if we're talking about the Democratic Party here, I think the people who are most affected by the bad decisions that are being made today are the millennials and the younger people. And unless we can empower them with knowledge about the issues and get them voting on things like gun rights and get them voting on global warming and these kinds of issues, it's lost, because I'm going to be dead before global warming is a really serious problem. The reason why it's a big issue for me is because I have children and grandchildren, and I care about them, and I care about the loss of species and other things. So I will mobilize in ways that I find other people in my generation will not. And I'll use things like Twitter and Facebook and other social media to try to enhance that. But that's where I think we need to be focusing. An awful lot of the wisdom in getting out the vote has been, walking the streets and knocking on doors. And where that's important, I'm not convinced that it's anywhere near as important as effectively utilizing social media to educate and mobilize people to get to the polls and to understand the issues involved. And so, I guess I'm an old guy with young thinking that thinks we're not effectively utilizing the tools that are available to us.
And let me just say something on that, okay? Sure. For those people who want to leverage, and I'm an old technical person, right? But I was raised with computers, and that makes the difference in whether someone, we have neural pathways that actually enable us and empower us to work a little differently with different apps, different systems, and so forth. And so a lot of times people even 5 years older than me have trouble with this, and then they make themselves wrong, or they sit for hours trying to figure it out. What a waste of time when you have dozens and dozens of millennials and younger people with technical ability who will just do it for you, and they'll do it.
Yeah.
It'll take them, it takes me a click of a button that takes somebody else 4 hours to do.
Right,
And
right.
right, but the only thing that I request is that things be actually scheduled at a time that doesn't take my life force away, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
millennials are also very, because I bike with them and I kayak with them, and millennials are very tuned into that life is short. And what did my one friend always say? We're not here for a long time, we're here for a good time. Right, so
Yeah,
they're a
yeah.
generation that's born, after the sexual revolution. I'm Generation X, and then they're younger than me. And if I look at my niece and nephew and so forth, they're really dialed into what makes them tick, and they're community minded, right? So they come with a posse,
Yeah.
right? So
But
that's
so
what
what?
you gotta do, is you just gotta tap into that posse at a
Yeah,
time that works for them. Don't create your meetings at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Don't do your meetings at, that take their weekends away, and
yeah,
figure
yeah.
out how to give them tasks that they can do at their home with their computers, right? That would be if you want to leverage. And then and then of course we're in such an area where so many retired people are, Marc, and I get that too. We want to leverage all abilities. And so my idea was, hey, why don't we have the younger people in the county drive the older people who don't want to be out after dark, right? And then that
Great. That's
solves
a
that.
great idea. Sure, sure. And also empower them to work somewhat independently on getting the message out. I mean, we can help to formulate the message and give people the bullets necessary to deliver a coherent reason why we're taking such a position. But if we're not getting it across because of the way we did it 20 years ago, then what we need to do is truly recruit the people that can get the message across, that can reach that whole new constituency who are inheriting the world we're leaving to them, and get them empowered. One of the things that saddens me somewhat is I'm seeing all kinds of enthusiasm on the part of millennials and skills that they're bringing to bear. But I saw that in the 60s. I was part of that hippie revolution that was really devoted to social improvement.
All right,
And
so give us your perspective on what are some mistakes that we should not repeat. But I'm in the middle. I'm in
well, I
I'm
mean,
in the lost generation.
what happened is most of the people that I knew sold out. They sold out for big paychecks, and they became stockbrokers instead of community organizers, and a lot of people did that, or they just became complacent, or they became numb to the many issues. And the reason why I've managed to stay, I think, active and committed is because I have broken down the areas where I can make a difference. I don't try to do it in all issues. I have a very narrow area of expertise, which is environmental or animal policy, and I focus on that. And I have to trust that other people that are concerned about, housing, affordable housing and stuff like that, they recruit people with expertise and they work effectively in that area. But I think that we don't have enough people with staying power. We get discouraged, and we can get discouraged in a matter of a couple of months because of the naysayers we encounter on a day-to-day basis, which really wear you down. Or you can be walking the streets and trying to talk to people, and you have a level of hostility that you can't seem to bridge because people are so angry and so tribal about their beliefs these days. So I think we've heard some pretty good techniques that can be used, which is to try to find areas of commonality before you introduce politics. One of the things that I think for local farmers ought to be concerned about, most of whom are Republican, is they have a workforce that's largely migrant, and they need that workforce to pick the apples or whatever. And so for them to be looking at current Republican policies that are taking away their workforce, they ought to be thinking that through a little bit more carefully. Their self-interest is not being adequately served by the current policies, the anti-immigration policies, or the guest worker policies. And so that's a constituency that we haven't reached out to effectively. because there is that one area of commonality. We may not have a lot of other commonalities. You know, an issue for farmers is transferring the farm to their children without the burden of taxation that breaks up the farm. So we have to look at their concern, which is adequately served by some changes in the tax laws with regard to estates, and say, well, they're served by one policy in this area, but they're disserved by
Right. That's the thing.
by this other. And until we can create those dialogues, then it's really hard to sit down and say, now vote blue or vote Democratic or whatever, because that's a conclusion that you're throwing at them without giving them the foundation to make that decision.
And that's probably something that you really learned as a lobbyist too, is, you know, that personal relationship first. And me as a publicist, that's how you get that grounding, that foundation of something in common, and then you go from there. Let me close in one thing. We're going to close because you and I are long talkers too. That's why we do what we do. But let me ask you one thing about resolutions, because you did bring up resolutions. So another reason why I don't resign is because I know that a precinct person in precinct leadership can submit resolutions. Right. Is that a false notion that I have some type of like that's important, or is that a false notion?
My experience with resolutions is very similar to my experience with laws and legislation, which is that most of them are meaningless. And the reason I say that is because they're kind of a brain fart that's thrown out there without an action plan attached to it. I'll give you an example. You know, you can tell the Department of Agriculture that that they should protect domestic horses from abuse in the show ring. They can't relate to that. They're in charge of 9 billion animals being slaughtered every year. They're on the other side of the equation. They're in the animal exploitation business. So if you try to task them with some pie in the sky idea of protecting animals that they're unfamiliar with doing, it's not going to work. So a lot of times when I think in terms of how do you solve a problem legislatively or through resolutions, I have to build into that a mechanism by which that will be accomplished, or it won't be accomplished. And it has to be a practical mechanism. You know, say you wanted, say for example, your idea was, let's say, protecting the environment locally, you know, in Henderson County. A lot of that is going to be done by county and city planners, you know, looking 30 years into the future and deciding, do they have to protect, you know, ridge tops from being cut down because of, you know, controlling winds? The trees are very, very important for protecting us from water slides and high winds, tornadoes, and stuff like that. That would be one thing. But also it's how many schools we have to build and blah, blah, blah. There's 1,000 things that we need to project into the future. And what we're not looking at is one of those equations. We're not looking far into the future about what the effect of climate change is going to be on our community. And I think we need to do that. But my point being is, if you identify a problem, you pretty much have to identify a direction or a solution where you want to go. And I think that a lot of times when we do resolutions, they're thrown out there. It might be a resolution that we're in favor of medical marijuana. Great. What's the action plan? How are you going to implement that, you know, and who's going to control it? And it may be a good idea, but it's just an idea until you come up with a practical way to implement that particular policy change. And we see that all the time in social policy. For example, we know in our community, Henderson County, is the most prosperous community in North Carolina. But all the money coming in is coming in from outside. It's retirement people and gated communities and stuff like that. That's what has built up the average income or the socioeconomic base of Henderson County. But as that happens, property values go up, and the people that have lived here their whole lives in service class are losing access to affordable housing. What are we going to do about that? That's something that's a problem that we have to face 5, 10, 15 years down the road, and we have no position on it. So to me, a resolution saying we're in favor of affordable housing is meaningless unless you follow that up with an action plan.
I got it. Okay. I went to, one of the reasons why I became a precinct leader was to write resolutions, because
Right.
it was, a solution to what's wrong with the party, and without creating a whole other third
Right.
party, that kind of thing. So I think that it's probably something to continue to explore. And I know that probably people have been watching this this dialogue between us, and they have opinions whether they agree or disagree, and that's fine. That's what the comment section is for. So is there anything in closing you'd like to leave us with about what works, what doesn't work from a lobbyist's view before we close? I think we've discovered really a lot together.
Okay. I think from a direct lobbying point of view, what's important is that you know the issues that you're going to present and that you're honest in your presentation. Most legislators will rely on you time and time and time again if you acknowledge the weaknesses in your argument and the strengths in your opponent's argument. So if you're talking about economic issues, it's not all one way. There are winners, there are losers, there are people caught in the middle. You've got to acknowledge all of that. If you're talking about environmental protection, it comes at a cost. What are those costs going to be? Who is it going to affect? And is it the cost basis analysis work? So being honest and being knowledgeable are probably the two most important qualities a lobbyist has to have. The third most important thing is the realization of where their efforts are going to have the greatest result. How do they contact the people that can influence policy change? And in today's day and age, it's usually not the legislator directly. It's not the lawmaker directly on any level. Except probably city and county government, locally, they're still very accessible. But on a state or federal level, they're inundated with corporations and wealthy people, the people that finance their campaigns. So you've got to find a way to get to the issue people that will affect their thinking. So I think that's kind of my take on lobbying. My take on local politics is that we fight over silly, stupid things, and we throw out the baby with the bathwater half the time. It drives me crazy.
And I want to leave the precinct leaders who are watching this with one thing too, is that most of us, we're talking about 300 to 500 people that we have to impact. I do that in a day. It is not hard. So this whole feeling of like, I'm not sure I can actually get the word out to, a couple hundred people. You can, and there's lots of ways to communicate. We are way beyond the printing press days. And so there's lots of ways to play with communication. And I really appreciate your time today, Marc. And I've got tons of clients who are pinging me, wanting my attention. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I will see you at the Beekeepers Club meeting.
Yes. Yeah, that's, very, very soon, I guess.
Yeah, and today is actually a very clear day. It's a good day to work on the bees, by the way.
Yeah, I know. I was just talking to some folks about doing that very thing.
Yeah, me too.
You have a meeting tonight? Is tonight the meeting for us?
I think it's next week. Let's see.
It's next week, I'm pretty sure.
I want to see.
Okay.
Yeah, next week. It's definitely next week.
Okay, Michelle. Good to see you.
Not that anybody else really cares about that. Bye, Marc.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Have a good day.
You
Bye-bye.
too.